Nah, that's Cowls. No. And I'm a little more amicable than he is. So
Okay. It could just be a persona. We don't know that he's
We
not
don't know.
super nice in real life.
Exactly.
He could be.
So.
All right. Guys, I am here with Dr. Clayton Cowl. He's an occupational medicine specialist, and he's a pulmonologist with the Mayo Clinic located in Rochester, Minnesota. Among his interests are aerospace physiology, inhalational toxicology, and occupational lung disease. He is the perfect person for me to speak with right now about the wildfire smoke that we see seasonally at this point in Western Montana. Dr. Cowl, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We are, as an area, seasonally affected by wildfire smoke. How concerned should we be about smoke inhalation and exposure?
Well, every year this seems to come up. I remember last year here in Minnesota, you don't think of Minnesota as having wildfires, but we get the gift of high level winds coming from Canada and from your end of the woods. And there were certain points last year where the air quality index, as measured by the federal government, was the worst in the world, literally worst in the world. And so I know that the people that live there in central and eastern Montana deal with this all the time. How concerned should we be? Well, it depends. It depends on sort of your baseline respiratory function. So the average person that doesn't see the doctor regularly, that's otherwise doing fine, it's more of an annoyance than anything else. And of course it turns the sky orange, and for all of those reasons it's an eyesore. And but for those that have true pre-existing cardiopulmonary disease, people with, for example, congestive heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that we abbreviate COPD, fairly brittle asthma, things like that, where there are compromises that exist in the lungs. Those are the folks that, unfortunately, this really does tend to affect, and we see a lot more exacerbations of pre-existing, already on the fritz, so to speak, respiratory conditions.
For right now, let's take that healthy group. Do you think that people are at increased risk if they exercise vigorously outdoors when it's smoky? I mean, at what levels does it become dangerous?
So the body is an amazing, resilient system. And of course, the body has a number of different ways that it helps protect itself, starting from the very upper airway. So the nasopharynx, for example. I mean, we have, all of us more or less have some, nasal hair and, mucous membranes that, that help us protect the upper airway. So that mucus is produced by little tiny cells called goblet cells that produce mucus. And what it does is when you get an irritant, a small particle, it strikes it much like a fly strikes a piece of fly paper and sticks to it. And we have this built-in mechanism called the mucociliary escalator, where it's kind of like your washing machine kind of agitating, only in this way it's escalating all the stuff that you might inhale up towards the upper airway, and then we cough it out. Okay. So there is some protection there. The issue with smoke, and particularly with certain types of smoke particles, is that they're extremely small, and we refer to those as ultrafine particles. So they are so small that they are able to elude or escape the normal protective mechanisms in the lung. So we've talked about the flypaper moment, where larger particles can stick to the oropharynx, the mucus in the oropharynx, and you cough it up, or it's filtered by your nose and throat, that type of thing. When you get down to the cellular level, So when you breathe these particles in deeper into the lung, you have these little, I'll call them Pac-Man cells. We also know them as alveolar macrophages, if you want to impress friends with your knowledge at parties.
Always.
Yes, so we have these alveolar macs that try to eat these little particles up. Now, ultrafine particles, as I refer to, are so small that it actually can bypass that as well. And that's why we get more concerned about individuals who vigorously exercise when there's a lot of ambient smoke, because what does the body do when you're exercising? You take deeper breaths, more rapid breaths, and so what you end up doing is inhaling more of those tiny particles deeper into the lung.
Okay.
Again, for the average soul out there, they're going to still do fine. You're not going to have people dropping dead, but you're going to have people that certainly you don't have to be a trained athlete to just, get out of your car, walk across the parking lot when there's heavy, forest fire smoke in the air in general, and your eyes might burn. Again, it's reacting with the moisture in the conjunctiva, the little saran wrap over the front of the eye, or in your upper airway. So you might find yourself feeling like you've got a bronchitis when in fact it's just more of an irritant cough.
Okay. And then I also hear people talk about headaches associated with wildfire smoke. I think I've experienced it myself. Is there a reason why that would be a symptom of inhaling bad air?
Well, headaches in general can be caused from a whole variety of things. And so some people might have a background history of migraines, and any kind of irritant or stressor can set those off, and including ambient or environmental conditions. In general, headaches in general associated with inhalation of irritants are not at all uncommon. And in fact, that you know uh, just being around that type of environment can cause headaches. Most of them are, they're resolve on their own. There's no danger to you in general. It's just more annoying certainly than life threatening.
And is there a way to prevent these symptoms? Can I wear an N95 mask outside? Does that help prevent these ultrafine particles from getting into my lungs if I want to get out and hike, even though the air is bad?
Yeah, so the tricky thing with, say, an N95 respirator, which, as is alluded to by the name, it filters about 95% of the particles. It First of all, when you are vigorously exerting or going on a long hike and you find yourself taking deeper and more frequent breaths, uh, the it may be as more uncomfortable to be wearing the mask as it is to actually just being outdoors in the irritant. I think on those very heavy, smoky days, the best answer is it's probably best to avoid heavy exertions outdoors during those days. Even though all of us want to be outside and hiking and doing those kinds of things, it's just that being out in that environment when the air is that dense, that full of potential irritants, it's best, if you can, to avoid it. And
Yeah.
that's particularly true for those with pre-existing health conditions, as we've talked about already.
And what about infants?
So infants and children are more susceptible than the average bear, so to speak, because they have developing lungs and because they tend to have more rapid respiratory rates than adults. And so they are a vulnerable population, if you want to call it that, along
Yeah.
with those that have medically related issues, or as you age, even if you are in fairly good health, where it's better to be inside in a more climate controlled environment than it is to be outdoors on those particular days.
Okay. The infants have much cuter coughs, though.
They do, unless you're the parent, and then it's that becomes not so cute for those folks. One more thing I was going to say, there's a difference also. Some people unfortunately have lived very close to actively burning wildfires. And the problem with being in that, as the higher, the dose alone determines the poison, as they say, the closer you are to those actively burning fires, the higher health risk there is. And that's been particularly problematic when we've looked at when, unfortunately, structures are consumed. Obviously no one wants to lose their home, but the problem with many homes or even certain sheds or that type of thing, if those structures are consumed by fire, there's a ton of plastics that make up roofing materials, siding materials, all that, and the combustion of those materials add a factor of concern beyond what one might expect, even with just, say, a normal pine or fir tree burning. There are various forms of chlorine byproducts, PCV. Many have heard of PCV pipes, for example. As those burn, the breakdown products of those chlorine products can be highly irritative to the respiratory tract. And that's why, for those folks that are living much closer to actively burning wildfires, they should not be outside for sure. And, obviously, they need to protect, if they have to go outside, they need to protect their airway. Sometimes it's not only with just mass, but sometimes it's moisture and mass as well.
Okay. Cover your mouth with a wet rag or something. All right. Well, I got to stop putting PVC pipes on my backyard fire pit at night. That's a helpful tip. We do have all of these air quality measurements. We have forecasting apps. We have, sort of an abundance of people telling us the air quality. Is that reliable for us? Is that a good way to gauge the air quality?
Well, I think in general, using those websites are helpful to help gauge in your particular area sort of what's going on. Obviously in Montana, it's a big place, so that the weather can vary between different areas within the state. Certain wildfires, depending on the wind direction, and that can make a whole lot of difference. And so air that was not so great in the morning, if there's a shift in wind direction, can be fine by afternoon or evening. So I would say that, especially if you're someone that has one of those folks with pre-existing cardiopulmonary problems, it's good to keep that on your favorites, so to speak, and check that out. It's a good resource, and I think over the years, the way that those particles are measured has become much more accurate, particularly in the last decade.
Okay. How about you personally? Are you a purple air guy? Are you like IQ air? What's your?
Well, I think that there will be a lot of industries that in general will use the medical side of things to sell products. And so, and call me a skeptic in that regard. But, like I've mentioned at the beginning, most people will do fine outdoors or even indoors.
Yeah.
I think most, it's obvious you don't want to be worried about outside and then burn a bunch of candles inside either. It's a bit of common sense here. You don't want to have the AC on and then close and have the windows half open. It's just, I think if you have a typical air filtration system within most relatively modern homes, you should be fine in that regard.
Okay. I have read recently about a study that linked dementia or early onset dementia with seasonal exposure to wildfire smoke. Does that sort of check out with what you know? Is that plausible? And why would that be the case if so?
Yeah, there's a lot of research that goes on out there. I don't think any of it is fully conclusive, but I think we have to start with certain hypotheses and work through those. Epidemiologic studies, meaning studies that involve populations of people, are always so difficult to do. Because it's again, it's a large population. You can't individually sit down and talk to all those folks. There's a lot of variables that we look at in study, and there's a lot of variables in the environment outside of wildfires that can play a role. There's also possible genetic factors that play a role in terms of dementia. So I think the jury is clearly out right now in terms of making any conclusive statements regarding, yes, dementia is or is not caused from inhalation of ambient wildfire smoke. But I think that some of the very early, smaller studies that have come out are compelling, and I think it is certainly something that will stimulate more research in the future.
Okay. The jury's still out, is what I hear you saying.
Clearly out.
Dr. Cowl, your background and working expertise in this area is tremendous. What drew you to the lungs as a specialty?
Well, I think pulmonary medicine encapsulates a lot of the things that any good internal medicine specialist would need to know. So when you start your training from medical school, yes, you do all your book learning. And then the last part of medical school is doing what are called clerkships, which is kind of like a career fair for deciding what you want to do.
Very nice.
I was one of those people that sort of liked everything. And so although I knew I was not going to be, for example, a brain surgeon or something like that, I did eventually go and decided to go towards pulmonary medicine and work in the critical care environment for a large part of my career. But I was also trained, I also eventually became trained in occupational medicine, where I was able to combine interests in various occupations and environmental exposures with that of respiratory disease. And so I think that it's allowed me to, use some of the things that I learned all the way back in undergraduate school. Like I was a chemistry major. For most chemistry majors going to medical school, they never pick up a chemistry book again. But I've been able to use some of that for some of the complex patients that we see here at Mayo Clinic.
All right. A very sweet love affair you've got with the lungs. I like it, and it has certainly worked out well for the purposes of this interview. At Hoary Marmot, we always have one dumb thing at the end that we do, and so I apologize in advance for this, but you are with the Mayo Clinic, and so I am prepared to put on a Mayo Clinic for you. I have my Mayo right here. This is Organics mayonnaise. Great brand. And I'm gonna eat some mayonnaise and tell you about mayonnaise. I'm not sure what you know about mayonnaise.
Basically, you need to pop on the movie Airplane right now, and it would be perfect.
Sounds good. We'll do that right after. Mayonnaise, Dr. Cowl, was first created in the mid 18th century in France, and it was actually after a naval victory in the French city of Mahon, I think is how you say that, on the island of Minorca. And so that is why we call it mayonnaise, because of Mahon.
I hope they pay you a lot to do this podcast.
It is tangy. Not nearly enough. Mayonnaise is not dairy. It's just emulsified oil and vinegar, or maybe lemon juice, plus some egg yolk. You can make it yourself at home, but the shelf life's not as long. It'll last about a week. I'm going to eat some more mayonnaise. How about that? Do you ever make your own mayonnaise?
I have not embarked on that private venture myself. No.
I'm not going to need to eat lunch. This is great. Mayonnaise can be used as a replacement for butter or oil in baking recipes to add moisture or richness.
Excellent.
That was a big bite.
So the question is are you going to go then for your lipid profile, your cholesterol levels, have it drawn this afternoon, as they say? That's a great thought. Your blood looks a lot like mayonnaise.
I'm going to be off the charts with that and chug some gravy to chase this down. All right, one more. The Titanic was carrying 12,000 jars of Hellmann's mayonnaise when it sank. It was destined for Mexico. That is such a shame to lose that much mayonnaise. Perhaps one day we can recover it
That's what they're diving for, and
Oh.
submersible vessels are diving for nowadays is the mayonnaise that has not yet been found.
A worthwhile effort, I say. Get it all back. I'm not going to eat any more mayonnaise. Thank you for joining me. This is a great conversation. I apologize it had to end that way, but I've learned a lot today, and I hope that our listeners and viewers have as well.
Well, very good. Thank you for having me, and hope you have a smoke-free summer, what's left of it, out in Montana.
I do appreciate that. All right. Thanks. We'll talk soon.